What would you do if you saw a child alone in the rain, shivering, silent, and forgotten by everyone around him? Most people walk past. One woman didn't. She brought him inside, fed him, sat with him, no questions asked. What she didn't know was that the boy's father was watching, from across the street, in a Bentley. He wasn't just any man, he was one of the most powerful executives in the city, and her small act of kindness? It would start a chain reaction that would shake boardrooms, uncover betrayal, and give rise to something no one saw coming. This isn't a story about charity. It's a story about what happens when a woman with no title walks into a room of power and refuses to lower her voice. The rain had started hours earlier, but it wasn't the kind you could just wait out. It came down heavy and unyielding, soaking through roofs, rolling off the sidewalks in miniature rivers, making every street corner glisten like it was made of glass. Most places had already closed. Most people were home, warm and dry. But not Angela Morris. Angela, 48, stood behind the counter of Eleanor's Diner, a place that had seen better decades. The menu board hadn't been changed since the 90s, and the coffee machine sputtered more than it steamed. But the lights were still on, and Angela, worn from a 14-hour shift, was still wiping down the counter like someone else might walk in. Truthfully, no one else was coming. She wasn't paid to stay late. In fact, her manager would have told her to lock up 2 hours ago. But Angela had always had a soft spot for the late-night stragglers, the tired cab drivers, the night shift nurses, the young men too proud to say they were hungry. She understood what it meant to carry exhaustion in your bones and still pretend everything was fine. It was as she reached for the mop that she saw him. Through the foggy window pane, framed by neon reflections and sheets of rain, was a small boy sitting in a wheelchair. His head hung low, arms folded tight, water dripping from his sleeves onto the puddled sidewalk. He looked no older than 10. Angela blinked, unsure at first if he was real. She stepped outside without a jacket, the cold biting instantly. "Hey there," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "You okay, honey?" The boy didn't move, didn't speak, just looked up at her with pale, almost translucent eyes, tired, like he hadn't slept in days. Angela crouched down, her knees protesting. "Let's get you out of this rain, yeah?" She didn't ask where his parents were. She didn't need to. She could already see enough in his silence. She took the handles of his chair and wheeled him inside. The diner was empty, quiet except for the soft hum of the fridge and the tapping of rain against the window. Angela grabbed a towel from the back and began drying his arms, careful not to startle him. "What's your name, sweetie?" she asked. Still no answer. "That's all right. We'll get to that later." She poured him a cup of warm water, then got to work on a grilled cheese and a bowl of tomato soup. Simple, but real. The kind of food that hugged you from the inside. He ate slowly, methodically, like someone who had learned not to ask for seconds. Every bite was quiet. No slurping, no rushing. Just careful, grateful chewing. Angela didn't press him. She just stayed nearby, wiping down the same spot on the counter, keeping an eye on him without making it obvious. Across the street, inside a sleek black Bentley, Thomas Ellison watched. Thomas, 60, founder of Ellison Industries, was a man used to being the one observed. Not the other way around. But tonight, he sat quietly in the passenger seat while his driver held the wheel, engine still running. His coat was dry, his seat was heated, and yet he felt strangely cold watching the scene unfold. Caleb, his son, had slipped away during a brief moment of distraction. The boy had always been quiet, always preferred the shadows. But Thomas had never imagined this. His son alone in the street, and a stranger showing him more gentleness than half the professionals he paid top dollar to employ. Angela didn't know who Caleb was. She didn't know about the wealth or the penthouse or the medical teams. She didn't see the name. She just saw a child in the rain. And she had moved. That, more than anything, stayed with Thomas. He watched her gently dab soup from Caleb's chin with a napkin. Watched the way she smiled, not out of obligation, but because she meant it. He didn't speak. Didn't step out. He just stared, silently absorbing something he hadn't felt in years. Humility. And for the first time in a long time, he wasn't sure if he was witnessing a problem or a lesson. A moment later, Caleb turned slightly and looked out the window. Their eyes met, father and son, separated by distance, silence, and glass. But Caleb didn't smile. He just looked back down and finished his last bite of grilled cheese. Angela refilled his cup with warm water. Outside, the rain kept falling, and inside that diner, something had just shifted. Angela was refilling the sugar jars when she noticed the boy's shoulders begin to slump. Not from sadness, but from something softer. Safety, maybe. His hands, still damp, rested quietly beside the empty bowl. For the first time in what must have been hours, he wasn't gripping the wheels of his chair like he was ready to run. She walked over, towel in hand, and knelt beside him again. "That soup hit the spot, huh?" He nodded slightly. "Just once." Then turned his eyes to the window. Angela followed his gaze, but by then, the car across the street was gone. A mile away, that car was pulling into a private garage beneath Ellison Tower. The moment the engine shut off, Thomas pulled out his phone and dialed. "Nora, I need you to find out everything about a woman named Angela Morris. She works nights at a place called Eleanor's Diner, Lincoln and 7th. His assistant answered without hesitation. "Of course. Did something happen?" "Yes," Thomas replied, his voice clipped. "Something decent." An hour later, Nora Fielding stood under the flickering diner sign, umbrella in hand, her heels clicking too cleanly against the sidewalk. She adjusted her trench coat, glancing through the window. The place was empty now, except for Angela and the boy. She rehearsed the line one last time, then stepped in. Angela didn't look up right away. She was wiping the same corner of the counter she always did when she was thinking. "Hi there." Nora began with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I'm sorry to barge in so late, but that boy, his name's Caleb. I'm his aunt." Angela turned, slowly, calmly. Nora continued. "His father's been worried sick. We've been searching for him all evening. I work for the family. May I?" She moved toward Caleb, but Angela stepped between them, just slightly. Not confrontational, just enough. "Funny," Angela said, eyes narrowing. "He didn't say a word to me. Not even his name, and he sure didn't look like he was waiting for family." Nora held her smile, but her fingers tightened around the umbrella handle. Angela looked at Caleb. "Sweetheart, do you know this woman?" Caleb said nothing. But he reached again, not for the woman who claimed him, but for Angela's sleeve. That was all she needed to see. "I'm gonna have to ask you to leave," Angela said softly. "Excuse me?" "You're not his aunt, and I don't know what kind of people let a child sit in the rain alone, but if you're part of them, you don't belong in this diner." Nora hesitated. Then, perhaps realizing the futility, she turned, heels echoing louder now, and vanished into the night. Angela exhaled slowly. Her hands trembled for the first time since Caleb arrived, but she didn't let it show. Instead, she walked back behind the counter, poured herself a coffee, and poured Caleb one too. With extra cream, no questions asked. In the back seat of a waiting car, Nora dialed again. "She's not stupid," she said quietly. "She didn't fall for it." On the other end, Thomas was silent. Then, good. He hung up. That night, as Angela closed the diner for real, she wheeled Caleb into the back office and laid out a blanket on the floor. "It's not much," she murmured, "but it's warm." Caleb didn't speak. He didn't have to, because for the first time in months, he slept without flinching. And across town, Thomas sat alone in a room full of everything, yet feeling like he had less than the woman who owned nothing but her shift apron and a second-hand coffee pot. Morning came quietly. No alarm, no rush, just the slow rhythm of raindrops trailing down the window and the faint sound of Angela heating up yesterday's coffee. Caleb was still asleep, curled up on a folded blanket in the diner's storage room, his hands tucked under his chin like he was guarding a secret, even in his dreams. Angela didn't wake him. She just let the silence linger a little longer, because for kids like him, peace wasn't a given. It was earned, and rarely trusted. She made breakfast anyway. Scrambled eggs, a slice of toast, and a little apple jam she usually saved for the Sunday regulars. No reason. Just because. Then, just after 9 a.m. came the knock. 3 soft taps on the glass door. Angela wiped her hands on a towel and walked to the front. There, standing under a gray sky with a black umbrella in one hand and a briefcase in the other, was a man in a wool coat. He didn't look like the type who needed directions. Or coffee. Angela opened the door a sliver. "Can I help you?" "I believe you already did," the man said quietly. She studied his face, strong jaw, careful eyes, the kind of presence that filled a room without raising its voice. "I'm Thomas Ellison, Caleb's father." Angela didn't open the door any wider. Your boy was alone in the rain last night. I know, he replied, voice even, and I won't try to explain that away. A beat passed, then another. Finally, she stepped aside. He's still sleeping. Thomas walked in slowly, his footsteps sounding foreign on the old tile floor. He glanced around, at the peeling walls, the old jukebox in the corner, the photo of Eleanor herself above the register. And then, back to Angela. I'm not here to reclaim him, he said. I'm here because of what you did. Angela crossed her arms, guarded. I didn't do anything special. You didn't see money, or headlines, or lawsuit risk. You saw a boy. He paused, and you moved. Angela said nothing. She wasn't interested in flattery. I run a company, Thomas continued. Ellison Industries. We've got more lawyers than we need and more consultants than we use. But what we don't have are people who lead from instinct, from conscience. She raised an eyebrow. You're offering me a job? I'm offering you a choice. Director of Community Partnerships, 6-figure salary, full benefits, no strings. Angela almost laughed. You think money fixes what happened last night? No. Thomas replied, softer now. I think it might fix what happens next. Angela looked past him toward the hallway where Caleb was still resting. You trying to buy my conscience? No, he said again. I'm trying to hire someone I trust with my son's future. The diner suddenly felt smaller. Angela leaned against the counter. I've been serving food to men in suits for 20 years. Most of them didn't even look me in the eye. Thomas looked her straight in the eye. Then maybe it's time one of them listened. She didn't answer. Not yet. He left a card on the counter. No pressure, no signature, just a name, a number, and a sentence printed in small gray letters. We build what we believe in. As he turned to leave, Angela watched him pause one last time at the door. Not dramatic, just still. Like he knew something had shifted and didn't want to break it. When he left, the diner was quiet again. Angela picked up the card. And for the first time in a long while, she didn't feel like the world was just surviving her. Angela didn't call him back the next day, or the day after that. The business card stayed tucked inside the cash drawer, beneath a stack of loose bills and faded receipts. She told herself it was foolish to even consider it. This man with his tailored coat and tidy pitch, stepping in and offering her a lifeboat she didn't ask for. She'd built her life on doing things the hard way, on not expecting anything more than what she could reach for herself. But something kept pressing at her. It wasn't the salary or the title. It was the way he'd looked at her, not with pity, but with recognition. 3 days later, Thomas returned. No entourage, no limo. Just him, holding a paper bag of pastries from the French bakery 2 blocks over. He didn't speak at first, just placed them gently on the counter like a peace offering. Angela nodded at the nearest stool. You can sit, but I'm not saying yes. I didn't come for yes, Thomas said. I came for the truth. She poured 2 cups of coffee, black, no sugar. Set one in front of him, then leaned forward. I don't trust people like you, she said plainly. You show up with good words, good suits, and then you disappear. And people like me, we get left holding the consequences. Thomas didn't argue. You're right, he said. I've left more messes behind me than I want to admit. I've climbed too fast, too high, and I forgot who I used to be on the ground. But when you opened that door for Caleb, you reminded me. He paused. Let the silence settle. You didn't see my son as a problem. You didn't see him as leverage. You saw him. Angela folded her arms. And now you want to turn that moment into a campaign. No, Thomas replied, slower this time. I want to build something with someone who doesn't need to be told what the right thing looks like. She studied his face, not the words, the eyes behind them. Why me? Because in a world full of people who wait for instructions, you acted. That's not something I can train. That's something I follow. Angela stared at her coffee. The diner felt heavy again, like it was asking her to choose, the familiar weight of routine or the terrifying gravity of change. She thought of her daughters, grown now, scattered across state lines, thought of the years behind that counter, of scrubbing the same linoleum floor and counting tips in crumpled bills. Of the boy who now smiled in his sleep, finally safe. Then she said it. I'll think about it. Thomas nodded, didn't push, just rose from the stool and left the untouched pastries behind. Angela didn't open the bag until after he left. Inside, scrawled on a napkin, were 6 words. You saw my son, not me. She folded it carefully and placed it beside the card in the drawer. For the first time, she didn't close the register with a sigh. She closed it with a question, and the feeling that maybe, just maybe, she'd been seen too. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime, revealing a hallway of glass, steel, and silence. Angela stepped out, her second-hand blazer sitting a little stiff on her shoulders, the ID badge clipped to her lapel still foreign in weight. The floor beneath her didn't creak like the diner tiles. It didn't bend to the rhythm of working hands, it just echoed. Ellison Industries headquarters was everything she had imagined, and none of what she needed. Too clean, too polished, too quiet. She walked into the boardroom 30 minutes early. Old habits. Inside, a long mahogany table stretched under recessed lighting, with chairs that looked like they cost more than a month of her rent. A digital screen displayed her name beside the title, Director of Community Partnerships. She stared at it a moment, then took a seat at the far end, not the middle. Not yet. When the others filed in, they didn't hide their glances. Some smiled politely. Others didn't bother. Angela kept her spine straight, her notepad open, and her mouth closed. The topic of the day, whether to outsource a major manufacturing contract overseas. A decision that would eliminate 600 jobs in 3 Midwestern towns. The CFO laid out the numbers. The head of strategy mentioned market trends. Someone at the far end used the phrase, non-essential rules. Angela listened. Then she spoke. "Before we vote," she said, voice steady, "I'd like to show you something." A few turned. One man, mid-40s, expensive watch, executive swagger, let out a quiet breath. Not quite a sigh, but enough to signal this is going to take longer than it should. Angela clicked her laptop. The screen lit up with photos, people in factory gear, smiling through stained gloves and steel-toed boots. Behind them, brick buildings, water towers, school murals painted by the children of those same workers. "These aren't non-essential," Angela said. "These are names I memorized last night. These are towns where your logos hang above grocery stores and church basements. You don't just make products there, you make promises." Someone shifted in their seat. She continued. "Cutting costs isn't innovation, it's math without conscience. And conscience is what brought me into this room. I don't have an MBA. I have hands that know what it means to serve 15 hours without sitting. And I've seen what happens when people like these walk home with pink slips and no plan." The room was quiet now. The man with the expensive watch folded his arms. "With respect, Miss Morris, passion doesn't pay dividends." Angela leaned in, eyes calm but unflinching. "Neither does a community that stops trusting your brand, and you can't rebuild that with a press release." Thomas, seated halfway down the table, didn't interrupt. Didn't save her. He just watched, like the rest of them. When the vote came, it passed by a narrow margin. But not to outsource. Angela didn't smile. She just closed her laptop, stood up, and walked out without adjusting her blazer. Back in the elevator, she looked at her reflection. Same woman, same roots, but something had shifted. Not in her voice. In the way the room had finally listened. Angela returned to her new office with a quiet satisfaction. Not pride, not relief. Just a sense that for once, the right thing hadn't been buried under numbers and noise. The decision had gone her way. Jobs had been spared. And for a brief moment, she believed that maybe, just maybe, this place could be reshaped from within. But the silence that followed was different. It wasn't respectful. It was calculated. The following Monday, her company email login failed. IT blamed a technical glitch. When she arrived at her office, the door wouldn't unlock. Facilities said it was a badge error. At lunch, she found herself alone at a table that was usually full of polite nods and harmless small talk. By Thursday, the whispers had reached her directly. Angela Morris is under investigation for breaching data protocols. No one told her to her face. But the look said enough. She had become the story. She confronted Thomas late that evening in his office, the city glittering behind him like a silent witness. "You said no strings," she said quietly. "There weren't any," Thomas replied. "This didn't come from me." "Then who?" He hesitated, just long enough to confirm what she already feared. Nora. Angela had seen it coming, not from arrogance, but from experience. In the diner, when someone avoided eye contact, it meant they were short on the check. In corporate, when someone called you inspiring too many times, it meant they were sharpening knives behind your back. She met with Nora the next morning. Want to tell me what this is really about? Angela asked. Nora was composed, impeccable. Her lipstick didn't smudge even when she smiled. This place runs on loyalty, she said, calmly sipping her coffee. And you've only been here 5 minutes. Maybe slow down before you try to rewrite the handbook. Angela held her gaze. I didn't come here to play safe. No, Nora said. You came here thinking truth would be enough. She stood, smoothing her skirt. But for women like us, especially ones who look like you, truth is only useful if someone in power decides to hear it. Angela didn't flinch, because she knew that tone. She'd heard it before, from landlords, from school boards, from people who hid sharp edges behind polite concern. She left the room in silence. That night, her name appeared in a leaked internal memo. Phrases like unauthorized access and potential breach floated in bold letters, stripped of context, inflated by fear. Angela sat in her apartment, staring at the screen. Not defeated, just still. This wasn't new. This was history repeating itself. But what the memo didn't say, what it would never say, was that Angela had already survived worse. And this time, she wasn't planning to disappear quietly. The meeting was scheduled for 9 a.m., but Angela arrived at 8:30. She didn't come to plead. She didn't come to explain. She came to testify. Outside the boardroom, the hallway was quiet, as if the building itself was holding its breath. She walked past the framed accolades of Ellison Industries, past portraits of men in suits who had decided what growth meant for decades. At the end of that corridor sat a table of 12, board members, legal counsel, and a compliance officer who didn't look up when she entered. Thomas was already there, flanked by silence. Nora wasn't. Not yet. Angela didn't sit. She placed a folder on the table and slid it forward. Before we begin, she said calmly, I'd like you to review the timestamps, server logs, and access history I compiled over the past 4 nights. Cross-check them with the IT department if you'd like. You'll find that I never accessed the system in question, but someone else did. The legal counsel opened the folder. Angela continued. Page 4 shows the login credentials used to pull sensitive files, credentials that belong to Vice President Eric Callaway. Heads turned. A few shifted. One cleared his throat. Angela didn't stop. I've also included a printed email chain between Mr. Callaway and a contractor in Manila discussing vendor transfers, timed precisely after I blocked the outsourcing deal. Silence. Angela looked at each face. This wasn't about protocol. It was about power. Someone didn't like that a woman without an Ivy League degree, who used to clean tables for a living, walked into this room and made people listen. The door opened. Nora stepped in, late by design. But it didn't matter anymore. Angela turned to her. You knew this was happening. Maybe you didn't start it, but you watched. Nora said nothing. For once, her expression slipped, just slightly. Angela stepped back. I'm not asking for my job back. I'm not asking for applause. I'm here because the truth has a deadline, and today it was due. One board member, a woman in her 70s, silver hair coiled tight, eyes sharper than anyone else's, broke the silence. Her name was Elaine Monroe, former federal judge. I moved to suspend Mr. Callaway pending full investigation, she said. Someone seconded it. The vote was called. Angela didn't smile. She didn't exhale. She just stood still. Like someone who'd finally been heard, not because she raised her voice, but because she refused to lower it. After the room emptied, Thomas remained. He approached slowly, his hands in his pockets. You could have walked away. Angela looked at him. I've walked away too many times. This time, I stayed. And with that, she left the boardroom. Not victorious, just whole. It wasn't a grand auditorium. The paint on the walls was chipped, the folding chairs wobbled, and the speaker system buzzed every time someone tapped the microphone. But the pride in the room made it feel like something far bigger than it was. Bridgeway Academy was a school for students who had slipped through the cracks. Kids with learning challenges, mobility issues, or lives disrupted by things they never chose. It was a place where progress didn't always look like test scores. Sometimes it looked like a quiet boy in a wheelchair raising his hand for the first time. Today, it looked like Caleb Ellison standing from his chair, walking, slowly but steadily, across the stage to receive his certificate. Thomas Ellison sat in the 3rd row, eyes fixed on his son. Not blinking. Not breathing. As if afraid the moment might vanish if he moved too quickly. He had watched CEOs close billion-dollar deals without flinching. But here now, watching his son walk with quiet dignity, he felt his throat tighten in a way no boardroom ever prepared him for. But it wasn't Thomas that Caleb looked for when he took that final step. It was Angela. She wasn't seated with the board or the special guests. She stood in the far left corner of the room, next to the sound booth, her back straight, arms crossed, wearing a simple navy blue dress she had borrowed from a neighbor at her old apartment complex. No badge, no press pass, no fanfare. Just her. Their eyes met. He smiled, not wide, not for the camera, but the kind of smile that belongs to someone who knows exactly who saw them before anyone else did. Angela nodded, her eyes not leaving his for a second. When the applause came, it wasn't thunderous. It didn't need to be, because this wasn't about recognition. It was about restoration. After the ceremony, parents gathered for photos. Balloons bounced against low ceilings. Teachers hugged students. But in the corner of the playground, under the shade of a crooked oak tree, Caleb approached Angela and handed her a rolled-up copy of his certificate. "I want you to have this," he said softly. Angela crouched so they were eye level. "You earned that." Caleb hesitated, then whispered, "So did you." They stood like that for a while, neither rushing, neither explaining. And in that stillness, something rare passed between them. The quiet knowledge that healing doesn't come from rescuing someone. It comes from recognizing their worth before they believe it themselves. A week later, a small article appeared in the local paper. Former waitress turns corporate ethics into action. It was buried beneath headlines about quarterly earnings and new product launches. But for the employees inside Ellison Industries, it wasn't the headline that mattered. It was what followed. The Community Partnerships Division now had a name, the Morris Foundation for Equitable Opportunity. It wasn't Angela's idea. The name came from the warehouse team, the office janitors, the cafeteria staff, people who had once been invisible in company memos. They were the ones who printed her name on banners and stitched it into new work programs designed to train, elevate, and protect workers previously deemed non-essential. The foundation offered job training for mothers returning to the workforce after decades at home. It funded apprenticeships for disabled youth, internship stipends for first-generation students, and set up mobile outreach teams in towns where Ellison factories operated, places where unemployment wasn't a statistic but a reality, passed from one generation to the next. Angela didn't give speeches. She visited homes. She answered phones herself, and every week she wore her old apron once, a ritual of memory, a thread to the woman she used to be. Thomas, too, had changed. Not in the way that made headlines, but in how he listened. He attended fewer meetings, started walking to work, and once a month he visited a shelter downtown to teach financial literacy workshops. Not to speak from a podium, but to sit in circles and explain in plain words how systems worked and how to push back when they didn't. At first, the PR team resisted. Then they gave up trying to spin it, because Thomas didn't want to rebrand. He wanted repair. One afternoon, after a long day at a community event, Thomas and Angela found themselves at a small cafe just off the main square. No drivers, no security, just two people with coffee cups and a silence they no longer needed to fill. "She's doing well," Angela said, showing him a photo of her eldest daughter in nursing school. "And Caleb?" she asked. Thomas nodded. "He joined a robotics club, said he wants to build something that moves like he does." Angela smiled. "He already did." They sat in the fading light, not as executive and employee, not as savior and saved, but as witnesses to something rare. The slow, unglamorous power of doing the right thing and staying the course. It didn't end with a headline. There was no viral clip, no standing ovation. Just a quiet Tuesday morning in late October, when the first leaf drifted across Angela's office window and settled on the sill like it had been waiting for her. Inside, the air was still. No hum of meetings, no ringing phones, just the soft click of her pen, pausing over a grant proposal for a school lunch program in a town most executives had never heard of. She looked at the form, then out the window. Across the street, a boy in a hoodie helped an older woman lift her groceries into the back of a cab. The woman smiled. The boy didn't ask for anything, just waved as she drove off. Angela watched. She remembered. Not the scandal, not the boardroom, but the rain, the silence. and a boy too young to carry that kind of cold in his bones. Caleb was in college now, not Harvard or Stanford, but a small engineering school where professors knew his name and classmates learned from the way he listened before he spoke. He sent her drawings sometimes, little sketches of things he wanted to build, prosthetics for kids who couldn't afford them, chairs that moved with less friction, bridges that flexed instead of cracked. She kept everyone in a drawer beneath her desk. Each page a quiet reminder. Kindness doesn't end at the act. It echoes. Integrity isn't something you put on, it's something you carry. Even when no one's watching. And sometimes the people who hold the least power are the ones who change the rules for everyone else. The Morris Foundation continued to grow, but Angela never expanded her office, never hired a personal assistant. She still walked the same route to work, still wore the same black shoes, resoled twice, polished until they shined just enough to be taken seriously, but never enough to forget where they'd walked. Because she knew, success isn't measured by the rooms you enter. It's measured by who you bring with you. One afternoon, a reporter from a national paper came by and asked if she had advice for other women trying to rise above the noise. Angela smiled, tired but steady. "I didn't rise above it," she said. "I just stood still long enough for it to pass." And that's what kindness does. It doesn't announce itself. It holds the door when no one's looking. It lifts the weight that doesn't belong to it. It sees what others ignore and stays when others walk away. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the skyline, Angela turned off the lights in her office and stepped into the hallway. The janitor, a man in his 60s named Marvin, waved to her. She waved back. He said, "You heading out?" She nodded. "I think I'll walk." Outside, the air was cool, but not cold. And as she stepped out onto the sidewalk, no crowd, no applause, no destination urgent, she remembered something Thomas once said, "You saw my son, not me." But what neither of them had said out loud was the deeper truth. Angela had seen herself too, and chosen to stay visible, even when the world didn't offer her permission, because sometimes the greatest act of defiance is to believe you belong in the room. If this story touched something in you, drop 1 in the comments if you've ever felt powerless in front of those who abuse their authority, or 2 if you still believe that quiet kindness can change everything. And if you want more stories like this, stories that remind us decency isn't dead, hit subscribe. You being here means more than you know.